Welcome to McMaster Minds, the show where we explore stories behind inspiring careers and cutting-edge discoveries. Today, on episode 2 for the 2025-2026 school year, we're bringing in a global powerhouse in the world of neurosurgery, Dr. Eisha Christian. I'm your host, Dominic, and for this episode, we've brought along some voices beyond myself and Angelica. You may remember Diego from last year's podcast series, and he's back for this episode. As well, some new recruits, Karina and Allison, are coming along for this session. Whether you're a bubbling scientist, a curious student, or just someone who loves a good story, this episode is for you.
Perfect. So I'm going to just start off with a few background questions. Just to start off, we'd love to hear a bit about you and who you are, kind of including your current role at SickKids and what you do at the U of T.
Okay, sure. So I am both faculty at the University of Toronto and a pediatric neurosurgeon at the Hospital for Sick Children. I did my fellowship and training here about 8 years ago and actually practiced in California for a while and then moved back in 2024. So I've been there for about a year and a half. And I am an assistant professor at the university, but the main reason I was recruited back is that I have a huge interest in global health and global surgery. And I think SickKids is quite unique along with the University of Toronto in terms of its outreach internationally. We train quite a few residents, fellows, medical students from all over the world in a way that we don't really do in California. So even though I'm originally from Los Angeles, I actually decided to move in 2024.
Sounds good. Thank you for sharing that. And then just stepping back a bit, we're also kind of curious about your background, including like where you're from and what first drew you towards or kind of sparked that initial interest for medicine and science. Was it like a particular moment or experience that set you on this path, or was it something that developed gradually over time?
Sure. So I grew up in Central California, and I have to say that I had a huge interest in math at the time, in high school, really, math and science. But again, I didn't particularly know what I wanted to do in terms of medicine. It happened rather late in undergrad for me, and not till my last year of my bachelor's. So I started actually as a biochemistry major at the University of California in San Diego. And I mean, honestly, I loved San Diego because I love the beach and I love the location. So I couldn't quite tell you that there were medical things that brought me there. But I was lucky because actually there was a big focus on medicine at the university and healthcare. And not only that, there was actually a global work happening in San Diego as well. The city is actually a large Department of Defense city, and it's maybe a little different from Toronto, but there's a big military presence. And so the military and the university worked together with a lot of global health education at the time. There was in particular a lot of presidential grants back in the early 2000s that were kind of bringing together different global groups in terms of health education. And so that's where I started developing this interest in global health and then in medicine eventually. I, interestingly enough, did not start medical school thinking I was going to go into surgery. I had sort of fallen into medical school, but I wanted to do infectious disease because I had worked for an HIV/AIDS training center with the military. And so that was my initial path actually into medical school after undergraduate.
Awesome. And then just to follow up with that, did you, like during that time at San Diego with the military being around you, did you have any experience, like direct experience working with the military?
I did. So I worked for a year after my undergraduate degree. I worked in 2003, 2004, partly for the military and partly for the university on an HIV/AIDS international military training program. So it was funded by the Department of Defense and run through the U.S. Navy. There's a big naval medical center in Balboa, San Diego. Again, like I mentioned, the university had a lot of collaborations with the Navy and the military at the time.
Okay, awesome. That sounds really interesting. Like one focus that we wanted to touch on is that neurosurgery is often seen as, one of the most demanding and competitive medical specialties. Kind of when and how did you realize that neurosurgery was something that felt right for you, and like when did it first come onto your radar?
Sure. So I started medical school really thinking I was going to do infectious disease. And so I wasn't thinking surgery at all. But then as a first year, I started realizing I really loved anatomy lab. And I hear now that there's a lot of restrictions on cadaver use and so on. But, we used to actually get a cadaver assigned to a group of 6, and you had 24/7 access to the cadaver lab, and you had the same person for the year, and really, really enjoyed all the dissections and working with my hands. And then I started realizing I didn't love medical management of health problems. I realized I wasn't enjoying so much the infectious disease courses I took. I wasn't enjoying the medications and the medical management, and I really liked using my hands. And so that's where I first started thinking maybe I need to consider surgery. And then I would say, as in a lot of things, as you go forward in life, it's really mentors that you come across that help you get to where you end up. Really, I met my mentor, who is still my mentor today. Now it's almost been 20 years, but he was the chair of neurosurgery at the University of Southern California, and I had sat by him for a scholarship dinner, and I ended up doing a few research projects with him, and I met some of the neurosurgery residents at the university as well, shadowed them, and started realizing I really loved the field. And so that's how I kind of diverted my path from infectious disease to neurosurgery.
It's really cool. Thank you for that. And then just lastly, for this little background section, looking back on your training throughout this whole process, were there any experiences, mentors? I know you mentioned the one that kind of sparked your initial interest for neurosurgery. Just things like that, defining moments that really shape the way you think about surgery and patient care today?
Yes, I think 100%. There's always specific moments in time that you realize change kind of your course as you go ahead. Coming out of high school, really had no idea I was going to go into medical school, and coming out of undergraduate, I had no idea I was going to go into neurosurgery. And so I think there were definitely moments in each segment of training that kind of pivoted and changed my course. I can tell you in medical school, I mentioned, I think, just the cadaver lab and having a group of friends and classmates who were really into similar things as well, and also mentors. I not only had Steve Giannotta, who was my mentor at USC for many years and still is. There was a resident, and he was a PGY1 at the time when I was in MS1, named Gabriel Zada, who's still there as faculty, and he was doing all this kind of research and work, and very open to people shadowing him and taking call and things like that. And so I think these were the two people who probably changed the course of my kind of career and as I pivoted into surgery. I think also we trained at the old county hospital in medical school in Los Angeles, which is sort of this historic several hundred-year hospital. And so the building itself is historically preserved now, and I think you got to do a lot as a medical student, and just taking ownership for your patients and doing procedures. And so I think all those moments really helped define, kind of change the path I took.
Yeah, awesome.
That's wonderful. Just pivoting a little bit into what life is like nowadays. There's a lot of talk around medicine right now in terms of lifestyle and different lifestyles of different healthcare professionals. We spoke to Dr. Sharma recently, who's a neurologist, and she had a very, very much diverse work week. So we wanted to ask about that work week. What does a typical week look like for you as a pediatric neurosurgeon at SickKids?
Sure. So, I mean, this, has changed over time for me. I can tell you that, my work week as a resident looked very different from my work week now. My work week in California was also significantly different from my work week here in Toronto. So I think I mentioned I was hired as a global surgeon. So I actually travel quite a bit. I am gone almost every other month for a few weeks. So I was in Ukraine in November. I was in India in December. I'm going to Rwanda and Burundi in 2 weeks. And so there's not really a typical, I would love to have a typical work week, but unfortunately I don't. This week, this morning, sort of my academic time, because I am sort of 50% academic and then 50% clinical. I have clinic tomorrow afternoon. I have clinic on Wednesdays. I am on call from Friday to next Monday, meaning 24/7, available for the hospital rounds over the weekend and covering any patients or cases that come in. So again, it's very difficult to give you a typical work week. Wednesdays in general, I have clinic, but being a part of the academic center that SickKids is, there's quite a bit of conferences and meetings, and there's tumor board. I think one of the things is always you work with a lot of other different specialties, so there's a lot of collaborative work as well, and then the research work that happens. So it is tough. I think I still struggle sometimes thinking, how do I balance all of this? And then I'm not mentioning family, right? Because that's an important part. And I don't have a good answer for you because I'm still trying to figure that out. And I think everyone has a little bit of take. I think there's 6 of us that do pediatric neurosurgery at SickKids, and we all have a very different work week. We have several that work in the lab and have a big lab. One's an engineering lab, one's more of a biochemistry molecular lab. So again, everyone's week looks a little bit different, and I think it's really up to you to tailor it to what's important to you.
That's interesting. It's interesting how diverse, the work week is. Like even, from the 2, professionals we talked to this year, both really having a diverse range of experiences on a day-to-day basis. That's so interesting. Just talking about, I guess, your practice as a surgeon, just learning about you dealing with conditions like hydrocephalus, brain tumors, epilepsy surgeries, congenital disorders, thinking back to, different neurosurgeons around SickKids that I've had the chance of bumping into, everybody has something that kind of unifies their goal and their practice. Is there anything that kind of unifies your objective when you're going into one of these cases? Like, what's your ultimate goal?
So I think my ultimate goal is really, to heal, I guess, if I had to put it simply. But one of the things about pediatrics is it's really hard to kind of choose one specific subspecialty. I started my practice in really having a focus on hydrocephalus back in training. So a lot of my research was with hydrocephalus and congenital type anomalies, which hydrocephalus would fall under. But as you practice, you really learn there's a lot of emergencies that come up in your practice, especially in neurosurgery. And then you have to be able to treat other things because your partners may not always be there. That's the whole point of having partnerships. So even though my academic interest is in brain tumors, I do a lot of brain tumor surgery, and then epilepsy really developed later. Once I had kind of come to SickKids for training, I did a lot of epilepsy surgery as a fellow, and when I went back home to practice, I realized there wasn't anyone doing epilepsy surgery there. So even though I loved hydrocephalus, there was a hole, and then you have to evolve your practice. So that's the other thing. I think I heard a neurosurgeon talk about how every 7 years you have to kind of look at your practice and some things will change. I would say that holds very true. I would say every few years you have to take a look, and you may start doing new things. The new thing I've done in this last year is started fetal surgeries, so operating on pregnant moms when babies are still in the uterus. So again, that's something I didn't do 7 years ago, but now I do.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I guess kind of uniting these 2 points about, um, your day-to-day life and your objective in your career versus, um, your practice being a global neurosurgeon. I wanted to ask, like, what have you learned about the emotional, social, practical challenges that families have to navigate when they're undergoing, their child having a surgery of these sorts? What have you learned about the families and kind of the way that they take it?
So I think, again, to kind of go back, this has been something I've really thought about over the years because when I first started neurosurgery, I did not want to do pediatric neurosurgery exactly because of this. It was just a very emotional sort of setting where you had a child and a family member who is obviously going to be devastated that their child has to have neurosurgery. And then as I went along, I realized you really get to be someone that's a backbone for them in what may be the worst day. I think the days I dread are the days I get an emergency room consult when there's someone with a newly diagnosed brain tumor. And oftentimes, I'm the first person telling these families that their child has a tumor and needs surgery and needs emergency surgery. And I used to in training be afraid of this part, especially as a surgeon. But I think as I went along, I actually like getting to be a source of strength for these patients and their families as they go through, and you really become part of their family in a lot of ways. I get invited to graduations. I get invited to all kinds of events in their life. I get all kinds of updates. I still get emails from my patients' families in California. And so I think as I've gone through and matured as a surgeon, I realized kind of you do have an emotional connection with these families, and you do provide them strength as they go through a very, very hard time in their life. And I'm actually appreciative that I get to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And like, yeah, as you spoke of, like, I think turning the page is really good, and seeing it in a more positive light. But like if you're thinking about the team that a patient has to work under, or I guess the team that a patient is speaking to on a daily basis, neurosurgery is really, really interdisciplinary. You probably interact with a number of different people on a day-to-day basis. How do you find that you go about your partnership with neurologists, oncologists, intensivists, others, to help manage complex cases? What does that working relationship kind of feel like?
It 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. Neurosurgery is very highly dependent on other specialties, and if you don't have partnerships with all these other specialists, you're not really able to build a great program. I can use epilepsy as an example, and at SickKids, we have these phenomenal epileptologists, and not just epileptologists, it's really geneticists, there's psychologists, there's nutritionists, there's a whole team that is involved in this, including nursing as well, and social work. And you really can't provide all the services that these complex kind of disease processes need without partnering with them. And it's being able to get along with them. It's being able to have meetings. For example, for epilepsy, we have a weekly Wednesday afternoon meeting from 11:30 to 1, and there's about 30 people that meet to discuss, and sometimes we discuss 3 cases a week over an hour and a half. And these meetings are kind of crucial to these very, very, very complex cases. We do surgeries where we're looking at their function, we're looking at their seizure control, we're looking at what may happen if we take out normal areas of brain. And so I think these interdisciplinary meetings have really led to our ability to do these kind of surgeries now. And I am really involved globally in building epilepsy programs in other countries. And I always tell them, you can't just do it as a surgeon. You can't just show up and say, I'm going to do epilepsy surgery. You need a team. And there's actually a list of what you need to be able to be successful in these kind of specialties.
Absolutely. Yeah, collaboration is totally key. Diego?
Yeah, that's awesome. And sort of to feed off of what you just finished saying, maybe like a little more pivot from the clinical aspect. But like you mentioned, you do a lot of global work and also research. Do you think you could talk a little bit about what that discipline looks like and sort of the work that you focus on in that aspect?
Yes. And so one of the big reasons I left my previous practice in California and Los Angeles and moved to Toronto is really the global work that SickKids is a part of and all the opportunities to collaborate internationally. So I joined in 2024, and actually there's a new academic pathway at the university for global surgeons. So starting in about 2014, I should say, there's actually a pathway to academic promotion where they look at your global work in terms of your academic productivity, and that's pretty unusual. A lot of other universities don't have this pathway for surgeons. So we now actually have general surgeons at SickKids who focus on global surgery. We have plastics and craniofacial surgeons. We have anesthesiologists. So we have all the specialties coming together. There's actually a Center for Global Health as well that helps bring us together and support us as we go through. We've had global surgery symposiums where we bring together about 60 to 70 surgeons at SickKids who are all doing work internationally. And so this is the main reason I was hired, because I think the days of surgery where you do mission trips are over. I think when I was an undergrad and things like that, you go for a week, you do your surgeries there, you come back, you don't know what happens to the patients, you're not really collaborating. It's not a great sustainable model, even though you may be helping a small subset of patients. And so now it's really trying to see how you can build systems in other countries. My specific area is the Ukraine, and so there is a large endowment at SickKids that funds building infrastructure in the Ukraine, and it was started in 2012. There is a neurosurgeon, one of my mentors named Jim Rutka, and a psychiatrist, Miroslava Romak, who had actually come together to put together this program. And it initially was just specialties that dealt with the brain. So things like neurology, neuro-oncology, psychiatry, neurosurgery. But it's really grown from there. So we do yearly, and I actually went twice last year, trips to Ukraine to kind of advise and oversee local surgeries. But really, the driver are the local surgeons and the local physicians, because it's helping them build a program that they can continue and improve on even when we're not there. And so that's been in practice now for, gosh, about almost 14 years. And so taking that model and trying to replicate it in other countries, because we've learned a little bit from what we've done well here and what we haven't. And it's a little bit hard, obviously, with COVID and the war to do global work, but we've kind of we worked through it and found online ways of making things work. My next step research-wise is looking at telesurgery and seeing, are we able to teach and advise from Toronto while they're doing surgeries in Ukraine. So I think, again, lots of things to work on as we move forward, and especially as technology is changing and improving.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I guess the collaboration with people probably really influences everything that you guys got going on. And I sort of want to feed off of that and ask you, why do you feel that in your pediatric specialty of neurosurgery, that global care is such an important part of what you do and not just locally? Like, was there anything that actually inspired you to take on the global aspect rather than just in LA or just in Toronto?
So I think my family always traveled, and I think we've seen things in other. My dad always told me everyone should live in a country with low resources at some point, because you really see how privileged we are in North America. And I think for me, I've been very privileged to be a part of great healthcare systems, and would love for everyone to have access to quality healthcare. And I think being in pediatric neurosurgery, is highly specialized, as you mentioned, and I used to think it was not possible because it's so hard to get the equipment and knowledge and training out there. But now I think it is, and I think it takes a organization supporting. And in that way, I find that SickKids and University of Toronto have both been very, very supportive in this mission to advance global neurosurgery.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I sort of want to go back to what you were talking about originally. You mentioned working in Ukraine, and your trip over there. And I wanted to ask you if there was anything that maybe you learned about medicine or healthcare systems, specifically working in like these resource limited areas or even like areas affected by global conflicts. Is there anything notable that like you've learned about medicine and healthcare from there?
Yes. And so, I mean, my kind of interest in global, like I mentioned, there was the military training program, but in residency, I actually spent about 5 weeks in Kenya doing pediatric neurosurgery at a local hospital. And I think I actually became a better surgeon. I think like we as surgeons here in Canada and the US, gain a lot of experience because you go to places where you don't have all the resources and you still learn how to do safe surgery. And so I think there is sort of this bi-directional component. I think you appreciate some of the things that are made easier by the systems set in place here, and the access we have to all these resources. So that's a second. And then three, I think, I'm really inspired by the physicians and surgeons that continue to work in Ukraine, because again, it is a war zone. I can tell you that we go for 2 weeks in June, and I was just there for a week in November. In June, a group of 4 of us ended up going to Kyiv, and that was during the very, very bad bombing in the summer, and we were in a parking lot underground, and you could hear the drones, and you could hear machine guns shooting down the drones. And I think, gosh, they're going through it every night. I'm doing this for 2 weeks and I'm tired because I'm not sleeping. But my colleagues here are doing this every night, all night, all year. And so I think you really have an appreciation for what people go through and how strong they are. I can tell you right now, they have no power in the city. They haven't had power for on and off for weeks, and it's cold and it's the winter, and and we're still meeting to talk about how we're going to build epilepsy. They're still emailing me, and we're going to have a Zoom meeting tomorrow with their generator. So it's actually very inspiring to me, and a reminder to me as we go through this to kind of put in perspective what's really important.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of stuff like that going on across the world, and it's great to have people like yourself and others who recognize the need. And so I wanted to continue to ask you about sort of like the barriers to getting equitable access, like for high quality pediatric neurosurgical care. And like, what do you think those barriers are, and how do you think that the field of neurosurgery could address those issues?
Sure. So, barriers start actually at the very basics with medical education. I think we, again, take medical education for granted. We take our residency training for granted. I am working with a few residents from Ghana, and they have a new residency program set up, and even with some of the residents and fellows and even junior staff in Ukraine, the access to medical lectures is limited, which I don't think I thought about 10 years ago. But even when I take out a lecture that maybe is, I think we all take for granted here and during my training, those weren't available for them. I mean, a lot of people I work with get their training by signing up for courses. They travel to other countries. They do courses for a week or two. Whereas really in the US and Canada, we have a very structured medical education here. We once we get in, you get your courses kind of handed to you. You go to residency, you get your training handed to you. You have check boxes you have to meet. And so I think it starts actually with medical education. And so getting to medical students, getting to residents, giving them access to good quality training, I think is step number one. And I've started re-looking at that, because before I really was just working with surgeons, surgeons who are already trained. Yes, then the barriers, of course, are equipment and all the technical things that come along with it. And it's not just giving equipment, it's then teaching people how to use the equipment and how to use it well. It's then maintaining equipment. Here at SickKids, something breaks and you have someone from the company come and fix it. Well, what happens when it's broken in Ukraine? So it's those sort of things that we're trying to work through and systematically provide access for them. And one of the ways is mentorship. I think being available to groups to help guide them through all these obstacles, I think is one way we can help.
Yeah, I think that was thanks. I think that was really inspiring and also very interesting to see everything from such a different perspective. Like you said, a lot of people tend to not think past what we're given, especially, we have access to resources like this podcast, right? So what advice do you think that you would give to young surgeons or trainees who aspire to also have careers in pediatric neurosurgery or academia?
I think the number one thing I tell people is, regardless of whether you have an interest in global health, I think having global work being a part of your experience is important, because it actually helps you appreciate where you are. So that's number one. Number two is, I always tell people, is you get what you put in. So if you are going through training, you have to give it 110%, because that's what you're going to get out of it. If you're going to go through your training and sort of be 50% committed, then you're also going to come out 50% trained. So really, it's the work you put in, and it is hard work. I think we talk about work-life balance, and I think the future, I don't have the answer, but I think everyone has to find that right balance. And I think it's more than balance, it's sort of a harmony. How do you find harmony between the work you do and the life you want to have? And so I think that would be my main advice moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful message, considering that I know you discussed how you, throughout your life and your upcoming career, you've been trying to decipher that yourself, even between all these different aspects. But it truly is inspiring to see how you're able to have so many different experiences in this world, not just localized here. That's definitely something that I know that many people look forward to. Now that we're given the opportunity to have these resources and have this podcast, if you could use your voice and share one message, just to overall summarize, like something you wanted to say to take away for families, trainees, or any other listeners that are on the podcast about the future of your work in pediatric neurosurgery, or even just child health in general, or any of the other personal work that you do, what would it be?
I think to remember that we're all connected. I think what happens in other countries and other nations will impact us at some point, and to know that the world at large is actually quite small. And so as they go through, is to really think, outside of where their practice is and outside of where they're living.
That is wonderful, Dr. Christian. Thank you so much for all of that. This concludes our episode. Thank you so much for coming on.